wow, disgusting.
This is why I tell you all the time, I don't have the gift of prophecy, okay? I guess, read more than you did about what America did back then, because ain't nobody is changing the system, dog. So they keep doing it. Nixon did it too, and so did Reagan. Okay, let's just hear what he had to say about how he broke the Democratic Party.
People don't really talk about what Reagan did to the Democrats, mainly because their evolution is more like a series of reactions to Reagan's popularity and policies. But there's a strong case to be made that without Reagan's political victories, the left-leaning party would be leaning a lot more left. But it's not all Reagan's fault. In fact, you can pin a lot of it on Jimmy Carter. Sorry, I know we all love the old elfish codger. Well, with the peanuts and the guinea worm eradication and the house building and the huge dick. So Long Jim came into office right at the end of both the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. Needless to say, people were fairly suspicious of public institutions. For this reason, Jimmy James, with the big old dick, originally ran as a Washington outsider, and by definition had to distance himself from New Deal politics. He was socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and ultimately his 1976 election win wasn't the big exciting, yes we can victory. For starters, he was running against Ford, the guy who took over after the crime guy stepped down. Americans were so unenthused that on election day, nearly half of all registered voters opted to stay home. Again, no one was particularly excited about the federal government at this point. The result being a guy who, bless his somehow still beating heart, appeared intent on pulling the Democratic Party closer to the center. So this is all to say that the Democrats kind of eked by with Carter, who firmly aimed for...
A lot of shit he did was ass. Like, he gets a pass so hard because people, I think, falsely point to the trajectory of the Democratic Party shifting to the right with Bill Clinton. But Jimmy Carter was the OG. He was the method.
For the middle by focusing a whole lot on deregulation. And so by the end of his first term, America was not doing so great. Unemployment, inflation, and economic stagnation were all very much a problem. Not to mention the Iranian hostage crisis, which Carter completely failed to solve and in fact cost the lives of 8 U.S. service members. Boy, this all feels familiar for some reason. So by the primaries, Carter had one of the lowest approval ratings ever. This resulted in turmoil within the party as Jimmy was challenged by Senator Ted Kennedy, who vocally desired to bring back the New Deal policies that had worked so well in the past. Weird how they just rejected that very popular stuff. It's just weird. The Democrats did this really popular and good thing in the 1930s and into the late 60s, and then suddenly decided to reject it instead of bragging about it and building upon it. But Ted Kennedy also thought it was weird, and so he ran against Carter on that message. The infighting got so bad that there was nearly a fistfight at the DNC between Kennedy and Carter supporters. Not a great look when people already lost faith in the government, but man, oh boy. So we got this establishment Democrat aiming for the middle while shutting out the more progressive side of the party as like a political tactic against a far-right candidate. It feels familiar.
And although he won primary contests in California and New York, it was Carter who arrived at the convention with a majority of delegates. But Kennedy, like Bernie Sanders today, argued he had the momentum and would do better against Ronald Reagan. Carter and Kennedy shook hands, but Carter's team never forgave Kennedy for weakening their candidate in the battle against Ronald Reagan.
Feels so familiar how they blamed Kennedy as if it's the progressives that cost them the election. Because, yeah, Carter was going to lose the shit out of that election. After all, he couldn't run as an outsider now that he was literally the president during a time where gas prices were super high and there was a crisis overseas. So familiar. And Reagan took full advantage of this situation, famously asking debate viewers, quote,
"Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?"
It was pretty bad.
Damn. I can't seem to put my finger on it, but like, even that line directly bar for bar is so familiar. Oh, well, it's probably nothing. We shouldn't think about that. It's probably insignificant. Less significant than the top of the hour ad break, for example, especially if you're subscribed, because at the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break. Now, if you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe for $6 or for free with a Twitch Prime. Here's a 3-minute ad break now.
Also familiar, and the Carter camp's only...
Wait, what? Whoa, wait, what?
4 years ago.
It was pretty bad. Also, familiar.
Are you better off now than you were when I was president? Our economy is shattered. Our border has been erased. We're in decline. Wait, what? What? Hey, yo, you mean to tell me Donald Trump, who tailored almost all of his strategies, with the exception of the immigration stuff, off of Ronald Reagan, stole that too for word? That's crazy.
And the Carter camp's only ace in the hole during their campaign was to point out correctly that Ronald Reagan,
I mean, even Make America Great Again, by the way,
was a racist. And while that was, again, accurate, voters at the time saw the attacks as mean and negative. Boy, the Democrats resting their entire campaign on how the other guy is racist and bad? Why does that feel familiar? Anywho, Reagan won, and his victory was seen as the end for New Deal Democrats, which, again, weird, since that shouldn't have been the lesson here. Reagan didn't win against a New Deal Democrat. He ran against a Dem that specifically distanced himself from New Deal politics. But despite this, Reagan's dominance caused a new shift to the center. You know, because many politicians don't believe in anything except what it takes to stay in office. In 1981, 37 Democratic senators joined Republicans to pass Reagan's first major tax cut legislation. That legislation slashed personal, corporate, and estate taxes. As a result, reducing federal revenue by $750 billion makers to make excessive cuts to public programs in an effort to make up the difference. But at least we got to pay less taxes, yeah? Kinda. The bottom tax bracket, as in the poorest Americans, saw their taxes cut from 14% to 11%, which is not nothing. That's like less than $100 back in the 80s, depending on your income. So almost nothing. Meanwhile, the wealthiest Americans...
Wait, who else did that? I can't think of it. I can't seem to put my finger on it, but I feel like there was another president that recently did that.
Had theirs cut from 70% to 50% for a total of $6.7 billion. If that doesn't sound like much, keep in mind that this is 80s money. The richest American at that time only had around $2 billion, also in 80s money, and was one of the very few billionaires in the country. Weird how there are so many more billionaires now. I wonder how the rich kept getting richer like that. And by the way, when I say wealthiest Americans, I am referring to only 82,000 Americans total. In other words, the literal 0.1%. Anyway, that same year, a Democrat-controlled House easily passed Reagan's budget plan, which included massive cuts to public programs and a near-total evisceration of the welfare system, resulting in almost 500,000 families getting kicked off of welfare and over 1 million workers losing their eligibility for unemployment benefits. But it was a small price to pay to lower Donald Trump's taxes specifically.
Thank you, Democrats. Very cool. I love bipartisanship. And you know there was dumbasses. There was no Twitch chat, obviously, back then. But if there was, I would be saying the exact same shit I'm saying right now. These guys are dumbest. Why the fuck are you moving away from the New Deal style of progressive messaging? Americans clearly love this shit. You're so stupid for not running this campaign. And people will be like, oh, you don't understand. Ronald Reagan hates that. And he's really popular. And then when he's in office, we'll push for his tax cuts and deregulation. We'll vote for it because we're assholes. We're corrupt assholes. And then people that defend those corrupt assholes be like, Hasan, you just don't understand. You need to have a really high IQ to recognize that like neoliberalism actually was really good for the American economy. Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. It literally gutted all of our institutions. Oh, no.
Cool. So, cut to 1984, and Reagan would once more crush his Democratic opponent, in this case, Walter Mondale. Mondale primarily ran on tax hikes aimed to fix the budget, which sounds super exciting, but at this point, the economy under Reagan was recovering, and ultimately had a shot at the big chair. His big focus was the growing deficit and more abstract and long-term issues that completely failed to charge people up. A real mitt, if you will. In fact, Mondale lost so hard to Reagan that he freaking quit politics. Mitt. Oh, snap. I guess he listened to me back in 2023. All right. Anyway, this loss caused the Democrats to continue to believe that their party needed to move even more to the right, specifically by focusing
It's so funny because Dems love losers so much they love Mitt Romney.
Focusing on fiscal responsibility and distancing themselves from the so-called special interest groups that originally glommed onto the New Deal. You know, unions, black people, women, environmentalists, gays, otherwise known as people. This continued to make zero sense since Mondale wasn't a progressive candidate, and if anything, the lesson here should be to stop aiming for the middle. Like, even political analysts at the time saw this move as a massive miscalculation, pointing out that the New Deal policies themselves were still very popular among the American public. Sort of like those polls that find that socialized healthcare is popular among American voters as long as you don't call it that. And this misguided idea that New Deal liberalism and progressive policies were unpopular dug in even further after Michael Dukakis lost to George H.W. Bush, Reagan's vice president, in 1988. Now,
who may or may not have JFK, may or may not have. He does not remember what he was doing in Dallas at the time. He was there. He just doesn't remember what he was doing. Wait, hold on. Guys, this seems kind of familiar. I can't seem to put, I know I keep repeating myself. This seems kind of familiar. I can't seem to put my finger on it. Oh, well, I'm sure it won't happen again, and it's certainly not happening right now. It must be a coincidence! Ah!
Election. Wow. Wow. Disgusting.
This is why I tell you all the time, I don't have the gift of prophecy, okay? I guess, read more than you did about what America did back then, because ain't nobody is changing the system, dog. So they keep doing it. Nixon did it too, and so did Reagan, and so is Donald Trump.
This is all to say that Reagan was obviously with the campaign against Dukakis and heavily pushed the idea that the Democratic candidate was a spendocrat liberal. And while that didn't have to be a death sentence, amazingly, Dukakis spent most of this campaign denying that until right before the election. Basically, the GOP wagged their finger and shrilled, "He's a liberal," while Dooku shouted back, "Nuh-uh, I'm not." And then, a month before the election, was like, "Actually, I kinda am." In other words, the Democrats had moved so far away from progressive politics that they instinctively treated accusations of it like a slur, the result being a perpetual state of defense against an opposing party that was more than...
God, it seems so, again, it's weird. It seems so familiar. It seems so familiar. I wonder what the chatters would have been saying back then. Hasan, you don't understand. Actually, the broad majority of Americans are actually moderate and want, tax credits for new startups being launched. They definitely hate broad, sweeping, progressive, universal programs. They hate that. I think one of the funniest aspects of this never-ending cycle of stupidity is the objectively false notion that like Democrats are doing anything to win. Okay, like they're not. Once you just drop that notion, this becomes much clearer for you. You know, the idea that like Democrats want to win and that's why they're making these decisions is just manufactured consent. You're an idiot for believing it. You are dumb for believing it. Some Democrats do genuinely think that this kind of attitude is actually going to help them win. But many don't give a... Okay, they're lining their goddamn pockets. If you can understand that about AIPAC, you can understand it about every other lobbying group.
Happy to trash Dukakis for things like his mental health. Of course, there were other people helping Dukakis lose along the way. CNN, for one.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty?
Oh, so that's where that Simpsons gag came from. Also, what the CNN? What the? That question is designed to have no good...
They did that to Bernie Sanders in Massachusetts, where they were like, you want prisoners to be able to vote? You want prisoners to be able to vote? Does that mean you want the Boston Marathon bomber to be able to vote? Also by CNN.
Good answers. Holy...
That question seems familiar. Has anyone ever asked you things like that in chat? No, never. Chatters would never come in with that idiotic ass question. They'd be like, oh, what if your fucking family members are raped and murdered? Oh, what then, libtard? Bitch, you'd want the death penalty then, dumbass. It's like, yeah, dude, that's why we don't make the victim's family members sit on the jury, you dingus. There's an entire reason for that, you know? Yeah, understandably, you would be a little bit more emotional about it, but the law is not supposed to be that way. Do you want prisoners to vote, lol? Yes, I do. What are they going to do? Vote for crime to be legal? Is that what you think is going to happen? Yes, of course I want prisoners to vote. What are you, stupid? They're human beings, dog. One of the coolest parts of the American, one of the only good things about American democracy is that you can literally run for president from prison, okay? And one of the best runs for president did actually happen from prison, Eugene V. Debs. Now, having said that, I think on principle it's a good idea. It's a good thing, okay? But beyond that, I think prisoners should also be able to vote. There is no better way to ensure that there's some kind of reform. They're already collected in the census data. It is ridiculous. They're enslaved. They are not only are they like legally slaves, okay? That is what they are. It is in the law, okay? Not only are they enslaved, they're also, playing a role in how large the district is and what kind of funding the district gets, but have no say in where that funding goes. They're still human beings. It's crazy to me that, like, fundamentally, I think one of the worst aspects of the 13th Amendment that plays a major role in Americans, like, backwards thinking in terms of, like, what prison is supposed to look like and what prison is supposed to be for, okay, is that slavery is not illegal across the board. That slavery can still be utilized as a means of punishment. This is literally at the heart of the problem, okay? I don't think they should. It's a waste of resources for people that got removed from society. Dog, do you think when someone goes to prison, they're removed from society? You realize that there is, like, it's not permanent. Like, no one is, like, people do get permanent permanent sentences, but, like, the broad majority of prisoners are not there forever. It's actually that fact. That is when they can go out, they can vote then. First of all, I already gave you sneakily the actual reasons as to why I think prisoners should be able to vote. You just didn't pick up on it. But one, they should. You're right. Felon vote restoration is actually pretty profoundly popular, like in the state of Florida, where it won by massive margins. And then Ron DeSantis still instituted a poll tax regardless. That was unconstitutional, but doesn't matter because America's not a real democracy, nor does it care about doing good things. That's number one. Number two, they should still be able to vote even while they are in prison. And yes, I mean, like, pedophile child rapists do still get one singular vote in that process, okay? Because the broad majority of prisoners are not pedophile child rapists, okay? And regardless of what the position is, and this is not me saying I, like those people. Of course I don't. They're evil scumbags. Having said that, however, they are still evil scumbags that deserve to have one singular vote because the broad majority of prisoners are currently being treated as subhuman, okay? As a prisoner, I disagree with you. How can you verify that we've been effectively rehabilitated? Just hypothetically, I'm a prisoner, by the way. I'm a prisoner and I love prison, which is where I can tune into the twitch.tv/HasanAbi broadcast, okay, with no restrictions, which is why I want to stay here forever.
Shit. So, yeah, this is the Willie Horton stuff. Remember the Willie Horton ad?
Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend.
Yeah, there it is. So in the years of Reagan, the GOP had built an extremely effective mudslinging machine, and Dooku's was the first person in the sloppy crosshairs. And the media glommed onto the crime narrative. They loved doing that. Also, that tank photo didn't help. He was steamrolled, or tank-rolled, I guess. And so, like Reagan, Bush very decidedly took it with 53% of the popular vote and 79% of the electoral votes. And so for the entirety of the 80s into 1993, the Democrats sat and watched Republican presidents maintain control of the executive branch. And boy, that messed them up. So after the break, we will talk about what happened when the Democrats finally got back that control. Was it good? Who can say? Unless you look it up like we did. Be right back.
Hello, my lambs. I don't know if you know this, but I recently moved to the mountains. And like everyone up here, I've spent most of my time trying to find and force Bigfoot to be my best friend. And Simply Safe has helped me try to achieve that goal. Thanks to their camera system, I can sit up all night looking for Sasquatch on my property from the safety of being inside my house. My Sasquatch. My Sasquatch.
Are they getting bigger? It's taking way more wax to just stun them now. And even then, they thank me for it. I hit them a bunch of times and they're like, thank you. It's not great. But hey now, hello, we are back. So back. As back as the Democrats were when Bill Clinton won the 1992 election. If you recall from before the ad times, we are discussing how Ronald Reagan managed to scare the Democratic Party into rejecting the New Deal politics that made them popular in the first place. And while we're now one president removed, even when Democrats finally retook the White House, they were still chasing Reagan's popularity by employing Reagan-era policy. Bill Clinton was one of the worst enemies welfare ever faced. If Ronald Reagan was its arch nemesis, Clinton was a solid sub-boss, like Carl and Hard. Or one of those freaks in Mad Max who barely has any lines, but is always kind of off to the side wearing a coat made of teeth and who's called, like, the hair eater. Anyway, Reaganized or third-way Democrats like Clinton thought that embracing more conservative economic and social welfare policies.
People say Cody Collab went. Dog, I've literally had him on the broadcast before, years ago. I love Cody. The only reason why I don't watch them on stream regularly is because their videos are incredibly well thought out, incredibly well written, very funny. It's just that they're really long. So that's it. And by the way, this is the last part of the video that I'm going to be watching. That's it.
Policies would distance themselves from irresponsible liberalism and help reestablish the left as an effective party. When Clinton ran for president in 1992, he did so with a campaign ad promising to end welfare as we know it, as though welfare was a minotaur, something crushing us all under its horrible cloven boot, rather than a basic safety net that was never a significant drain on the economy. And when he was up for re-election in 1996, Clinton followed through on his promise, signing the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, otherwise known as the Welfare Reform Act. The legislation got rid of the much-needed cash assistance program for low-income families and replaced it with TANF, or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. At this point, many states have done away with the program altogether, or made it so hard to access the funds that a lot of people don't even bother. For example, as of 2015, 1.3 million families received benefits from TANF, which is only 15% of those that were eligible. The man made good on his promise to take one of the only public goods that exists in this country and execute it in the street like the end of New Jack City. You know the meme? Clinton played a number of other Republican hits on his saxophone while in office, including attempts to deregulate Wall Street even more and cut Social Security even further. The point is, in attempting to accommodate Reagan-era voters, the Democratic Party was gradually shedding any reason.
Yeah, that's why look, listen, this is why I hate the Republican Party and hate the Democratic Party with almost the same level of severity. I think that they are just like number one and number two most evil institutions, okay? And this is also why I say regularly that, like, America is not a real duopoly. It's technically a single party with, like, some distinctions. And those distinctions in the margins do leave people empty-handed, do leave millions of people on the ground with worse outcomes overall. But make no mistake, it is like, there's one direction that America has been heading down since neoliberalism began in this country, like a fever dream. And that direction is a uniparty that represents the interests of, in an almost dictatorship style manner, a group of wealthy individuals, an oligarchy, if you will, or, a dictatorship of the few, rather than, I don't know, what would be the alternative to a dictatorship of the few? A dictatorship of the many, which I guess you could really think about as, you either have the 1% running the show or the 99% running the show. Americans personally think that 99% running the show is bad because they've been conditioned into thinking that the rule of the majority would be considered a tyranny of the majority. But the reverse of the tyranny of the majority is the tyranny of minority, which is what we have now. And I think if there's going to be tyranny, I'd rather have it be at the behest of the majority rather than the minority. A dictatorship, if it's a inevitability, would be far more preferable if it was a dictatorship of the many, maybe the dictatorship of the working class. Much to consider, a dictatorship of the proletariat rather than the bourgeoisie, capital owners versus working class.
Anyone would ever have to vote for them in the future. It's like when a big budget movie, let's say a movie about The Rock saving Santa Claus, gets noted to death by executives trying to accommodate every possible demographic and ending up with a movie made for nobody that nobody wants to see. I mean, I'd still want to see this made-up movie where The Rock plays like a special agent for Santa, maybe get J.K. Simmons as the big man, stick Chris Evans in there, really bloat that budget, Can you imagine a movie like that existing? In theaters. This is not a Netflix movie. It is for theaters. So Clinton had a background with the Democratic Leadership Council, or the DLC, which had some cool extra skins, but ultimately just felt like planned parts of the game they didn't have time to polish in time for the main release. Also, the actual thing we're talking about, the Democratic Leadership Council, was founded in 1985 by Democratic
Third way neoliberalism. Ooh, the third way, baby. The method.
strategists specifically looking to reshape the left after Reagan's Tyson-esque KO of Mondale in '84. Clinton chaired the council from 1990 to 1991, notably leaving only when it was time to run for president. Under his leadership, the DLC published the New Orleans Declaration in 1990, which outlined their policy goals for the Democratic Party. Specifically, repealing affirmative action policies, implementing more workfare-style programs like the ones Reagan loved to smooch, and going tough on crime by focusing on harsher sentencing rather than investing in infrastructure or programs to address the root problems of crime, which, by the way, was on its way down when Clinton took office. The DLC also wanted to cut ties with the labor unions because of all those anti-labor shenanigans Reagan spearheaded, and prioritize information technology and global trade. In tandem with the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which had made it both legal and lucrative for virtually every industry in America to outsource their operations, with nearly every state losing thousands of jobs as a result. So, Clinton and the Democratic Party became the administration of boning American workers.
I would say that the Clinton administration was the final, it was the final nail in the coffin in terms of permanent polarization amongst the parties, both as a consequence of the Southern strategy, but also beyond the Southern strategy. That kickstarted the division between, or that kickstarted the former labor enclaves that would still historically, because they were a part of unions, vote for the Democratic Party. After that, it was done. That, and also Newt Gingrich brought, this is so funny. Look, one person said, I love this community sometimes, but this person said the culture war shit, and this person said Newt Gingrich, which is hilarious because Newt Gingrich is one of the architects of American culture wars. That is, you're both right. Both of you are right. That made it completely permanent. The uniparty attitude with this false duopoly under the American democratic process came in this era. You're both right. You're absolutely correct. It made American political polarization or party polarization permanent, right? Throughout American history, there was always division, and obviously, especially during the abolition of slavery, Reconstruction. American political polarization, or American political parties, were more so focused on their own immediate geographic needs and their own immediate geographic interests. And obviously, throughout time, there was more of a shoring up of support for either political party across the board, which ultimately turned into a permanent position. That's why you see the rural-urban divide. That's why you see the racist, anti-racist, at least in aesthetics, divide in either party. That's why you see all of the minor differences between each party. This is why I always say both parties are identical. There's a uniparty approach when it comes to deregulation. There's a uniparty approach when it comes to tax deductions and tax cuts for the wealthy. There's a uniparty, eradicating social safety nets, specifically welfare and whatnot. And then all of the other stuff that does not factor into this are minor differences in opinion that will still ultimately lead to major harm on the ground for the average American, for sure. But like ultimately on the legislative agenda, a minor disagreement, like people that pick and choose whatever they want to point to be like, this is our thing. If you vote for us, you'll get more of this thing that is our thing. And if you vote for the Dems, you won't get that. Guns, abortion, these are all, they're not minor issues overall, but in the grand scheme of things, like in terms of, broad, sweeping changes for the American legislative agenda, like they are basically things that shouldn't be issues at all, or things that could be left up to like local state governance and whatnot, that they have decided will be the number one thing. And this is what the party is about. This is what the party represents.
Workers to enrich corporate business owners. This is obviously exactly what Reagan did for an entire decade. But the thing about Democrats aiming to court the center-right is that, as we said, you piss everyone off. You piss everyone off. Even though he was doing Reagan shit, the GOP wasn't about to praise or even acknowledge it. They'd much rather move even more to the right and let progressives and the far left go after a center-leaning Democrat for ignoring his party. And the people did. Rightfully so. The anti-Clinton animosity built to the battle in Seattle in 1999, where tens of thousands of union workers rallied outside a World Trade Organization conference side by side with a diverse coalition of activists to protest the damage being done to American labor. And Clinton's 1994 crime bill, spearheaded by Joe Biden, gave states the go-ahead to implement more punitive laws, expanded the death penalty, and encouraged the construction of more prisons. All factors that have directly contributed to the current mass incarceration crisis. The DLC dissolved in 2011 after spinning a few more popular hits like supporting the Iraq War, but it was pretty much obsolete by the time President Barack Obama took office in 2009. Thanks, Obama. Wait. Thanks, Obama. Speaking of the Iraq War.
Yeah, except Barack Obama made it obsolete in theory and then literally did third way politics. The entire regime, the entire Obama regime, which I'm sure Cody's going to get to because obviously he is very smart and very thoughtful and very good at his job, is marred with third way politics across the board. What was it? The Legion of Enemies or whatever the fuck it was called. God damn it. I'm forgetting. What did he call it? Team of Rivals. That's what he called it. Not Axis of Evil. That's Team of Rivals.
That's next. Because after, possibly stealing the election, Bush Jr. would have his bumbling presence immediately boosted by a singular unifying event in September of 2001. The release of Mariah Carey's Glitter, and also the attacks on the World Trade Center.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
I forget if he was talking about glitter or the other thing in that clip, but you get it. It's not accurate to say that Iraq pushed Democrats more to the right, so much as it put them in a sort of political stasis. The centrist Dems were obviously all for the war, while anyone further on the left had to contend with most of the country, including the media, joining along. Like, here's Vanity Fair, a publication that Trump would probably call terrorist today, running a gushing profile on Bush titled War and Destiny.
Glaze! Manufacturing consent. That's what it is. This is how it works. Okay? This is how it works. This is a monstrous piece of shit. But they will literally get you in all of your hyper-specific niche interests, okay? This is how this works. Yeah. This is how they sell it to you. There is always a mechanism to get you to be on board with war. Okay? You understand? If you're into gay shit, let's say you're like a queer rights advocate or whatever, you know, they'll say, oh, we can't pull out of Afghanistan because homosexual Afghan women are going to be butchered by the Taliban. Okay? They'll use any and every type, any and every demographic, every psychographic profile to be able to advocate for war no matter what. You can always find an argument. Okay? They do this. Look to Israel. I mean, look at how Israel sells the genocide. That is the method.
To be fair, that's from 2002, before the invasion of Iraq, which, to be balanced, a lot of House Democrats voted against, but a whole lot of Senate Democrats did not. This included Hillary Clinton and our pal Joe Biden. In fact, Biden and Clinton very vocally defended their pro-war stance.
Real thinking question, not troll, from someone old enough to be active during 9/11. Was this actively manufacturing consent, or was this just an active media cycle? I remember clearly at the time, if you publish anything anti-war, anti-Bush, the American public itself was very against it at the time due to a want for revenge. Was this manufactured from the media, or were they reacting to the public's bloodthirst? No. The public was definitely primed for bloodthirsty sentiments, and the media absolutely played a role in it, getting worse and worse. It's not a chicken or the egg situation. It definitely is. It definitely is the media leaning into it hard as they still do it to this day. Think about it. Think about it right now. Think about your opinion on Gaza. Think about how you feel about Gaza. Think about how the average person around you feels about Gaza. You're a little bit older. You're a bit of a liberal. But by and large, I think you kind of are aware of the public sentiment, especially like the youth sentiment on Gaza, right? And yet if you only look at the media right now, you get a very different perspective. They make it seem every goddamn day like it's Hamas that's sullying the deal. The youth are anti-Semitic for ever daring to declare that Israel is a genocidal apartheid regime, and that everyone is universally applauding Israel for all of the brave actions that they've taken, with some coverage in between where they're like, yo, they killed another American citizen, or yo, they actually kind of killed a lot of babies, and there's now a polio crisis happening inside of Gaza. You know, that sort of shit. Yeah, Judith Miller and the New York Times were one of the worst offenders of selling the Iraq War. Obviously, the lie, the WMD lie that they promoted falsely without any sort of... And the New York Times plays that role still to this day, by the way, dutifully. The New York Times is a dutiful servant of the American State Department. They did that shit. They did that shit during the Iraq War, and they are still doing that shit for Israel, worse than many other mainstream media outlets, which is really sad. What's really crazy is, like, of course, there were massive anti-war protests back then as well, and they didn't get broad coverage. And of course, in the sea of that, like, in the sea of the feverish right-wing, we have to go to war and shit up attitude that was being represented by every orifice, obviously, they would then play what I told you before, poll numbers on television to say, look, we did our job. 75% of the American public want to go to war with someone, anyone. This is the democratic will. That is no different than the way that the media will sometimes show those polls about, like, Israel-Palestine. It's actually shocking that there is still an overwhelming majority of people that want a ceasefire, that even are ready to deny weapons transfers to Israel, America's number one ally, most moral nation on the planet, in spite of all of that media coverage. That's what you got to think about. Okay? Don't they say the same thing about war with Russia? What do you mean? I've said time and time again that Americans do not give a about like war with Russia in general. No matter how much there's media coverage over it, they don't care. Okay? That's not a thing. Americans are selfish. Foreign policy is not like the number one concern in general. And by and large, they are on board with just not seeing any conflict whatsoever, both in television and certainly not with like American soldiers dying. So the attitude towards war with Russia is identical to the attitude towards like deploying troops to defend Israel. Okay? Americans, by and large, would rather not have Russia pummel Ukraine or Israel pummel Gaza. They would just rather, they either A, don't care about it, or B, really care about it by very large numbers in the direction of stopping that conflict. And then C, there's the obvious, like, smaller percentage, at least if we're looking at the Democratic Party, the smaller percentage of people who want the continuation of that conflict. But once again, with respect to Ukraine and Russia, the more, like, America can show HIMARS and how Raytheon's missile systems could be super helpful to launching Ukraine's defenses. But ultimately, by and large, and I said this when I talked to Ethan as well, where I was like, Americans don't really give a fuck about Ukraine. Like, I promise you. Like, that's not a thing that they care about. That's not a consideration they care about. And the Republicans will cut messaging against the Democratic Party by being like, you're giving hundreds of billions of unrestricted funds to Ukraine, when instead they could be used over here. Okay? While America's motivation in the continuation of the war in Ukraine, okay, ultimately, Ukraine is on the right side of history. Ukraine is in the right for wanting to defend its territories from a much larger nation that is obviously violating Ukrainian sovereignty, okay, and killing a shitload of Ukrainians at the same time, and also have seemingly purged a decent chunk of the Ukrainian population from Ukrainian borders in general out of fears that they will either die in war or will have to be forcibly conscripted to go to war. So Russia has destabilized and eviscerated entire parts of Ukraine. Very big no-no. And Ukraine has the right to want to defend itself. Ukraine has the right to defend itself and understandably is trying to defend itself in the process. The issue here is that like, if you're asking me what Americans feel about it, they don't give a okay? They'll be like, yeah, Ukraine, we're pro-Ukraine. I get it. Slava Ukraini, you know? But, like, overall, they don't give it much thought. What is the media's motivation for selling the war, though? The media's motivation for selling the war is the same as the media's motivation for selling Israel's side on the Israeli offensive. Although we're on the objectively wrong side of the Israel genocide of Palestinians, and technically on the right side with defending Ukraine from Russian invasion, even if it is for the wrong reasons, we are on the right side on the Ukrainian front. Ultimately, the reason is the American State Department finds that to be our interest, so obviously the media will defend it and try to change people's perceptions as to the best of their ability. That's it. If America tomorrow, by some weird reason, like by some weird change of heart, decided to be pro-Palestine, and the State Department communicated that, like, being pro-Palestine would actually be beneficial to America's foreign policy goals in the region, then the media would slowly start. There'd be a lot of naysayers. Obviously, there's a lot of money at play beyond that. But ultimately, there would be a lot of there would be a big change in attitude from even the likes of the New York Times. I 100% know that. There are no truly right sides in those wars, though. Yes, there is. What are you talking about? There is an obviously right side in both of those wars. Ukraine was invaded, okay? It doesn't matter what America's interest in Ukraine were. Ultimately, they were invaded by a foreign power, okay? Its sovereignty was violated. Its people were killed. There is absolutely, objectively, a right side in that story. Just like on genocide that Israel is currently doing, which is even worse, there is objectively a right side there. The clear aggressor in that situation is Israel. The clear wrong party, the wrong good party is the Palestinians. The party that's in the wrong is the Israeli government. You said a few years ago that Crimea annexation was justified. Can you explain why you thought that at the time? I don't want to go back into this over and over again. I have always brought up Crimea as a separate issue in terms of both its geopolitical interest for the Russian government in Sevastopol and also the demographic makeup of Crimea. Ultimately, Russia overtaking Crimea is obviously significantly less bloody than the regions that Russia has been actively bombing since then, since the invasion of Ukraine. This is not Russia apologia. This is literally something that, like, you can look at in Western polling as well. Not just my attitude on it, okay? Either you believe in, like, territorial boundaries unconditionally, regardless of what, like, the people that live there are. But ultimately, Crimea, as I've said time and time again, primarily, first and foremost, belongs to Crimeans. The USSR took the Crimeans out of Crimea and filled the Crimean population, as they have done historically with many other parts of the USSR, which I think was a major misstep in the USSR, by Russifying Crimea. Like, Crimea belongs to the Tatar population. Russians took the Tatar population and engaged in a Russification of Crimea. Once the USSR dissolved, even though Crimea was still technically a part of Ukrainian territory, it was still heavily comprised of people who found themselves to be Russian. This is the reason why the annexation of Crimea was not done with, like, significant bloodshed. This is also part of the reason why Ukraine immediately blew up the USSR era built. Bro, shut up. I swear the 100K check is in the mail. Please stop. This is also the reason why I have always maintained the position that the Crimean problem, or the Crimean annexation, is very different than the invasion of Ukraine, the complete invasion of Ukraine, complete and total invasion of Ukraine. But yeah, they didn't do it as a part of deliberate ethnic replacement. They assumed that the ethnic minority would align with Nazi Germany, so they moved them back and then just moved Russians in to keep the farms and factories running. Perhaps a distinction without a difference. Yes. Yeah, you can't Russify. You can't Russify an entire area and then be like, well, there was good reasons for it. It's like, no, that's just like ethnic displacement. Like, that's deliberate ethnic displacement. It was also objectively an unpopular and bad idea. Russification ultimately was one of the major issues with the USSR. It didn't work. It was a failure. Anyway. So is Israel allowed to annex the Golan if Golanis consider themselves Israelis? Only Majdul Shams refuse citizenship? Beautiful question. Okay, great question. There is a problem with new settlers and new settlements in that process. Do you understand? The problem in that circumstance is new settlers came in and settled. In the Golan Heights specifically. It's not like the Syrian government resettled the Syrians that were living in the Golan Heights, and that all of the Syrians living in the Golan Heights at the time were actually ethnically and religiously Jewish and wanted to be a part of Israel or saw themselves as a part of Israel. Do you understand? That's the major difference here. Like, the ethnic displacement and the Russification occurred far before the dissolution of the USSR, long before the dissolution of the USSR. There's a way to, there's a way to stop further harm from happening, and then there's a way to recognize the reality on the ground. This is also part of the realpolitik attitude that I have towards a one-state solution in Israel, because I also recognize that mass displacement of 750,000 Israeli settlers that are from every different part of the world, and some from Israel as well, Israel proper as well, would be a genuine, impossible, and often very uniquely cruel policy proposal. This is what a 1967 boundaries two-state proposal looks like. That is what that would mean. It would require an unimaginable amount of violence that is never going to happen regardless. Okay? This is why I'm a one-stater, because Israel made it impossible to be a two-stater during the peace negotiations, as they consistently kept settling and building and expanding settlements in the West Bank. While that would be the correct thing to do, right? Because objectively, like, they don't get to live there. That's not their place. That's not their homeland. That's not their territory. They're illegally occupying it. They're doing an act of terrorism. Okay? That would still be, sometimes the correct position is still going to lead to an unimaginable amount of violence. Does that make sense? This is why I maintain my consistent perspective on all of these issues. Let's continue.
Stance. More than that, Joe pushed it. He full-throatedly backed the WMD lie and chaired hearings specifically designed to justify the war. Actual quote from Biden about the impending war.
So you're against democracy when the majority of Americans want war? Dude, what are you doing? I know you are trying to do a two-parter debate. Are you trying to get banned? At the top of the hour, the majority of this chat doesn't want an ad break. Or at least the majority of this chat has decided that two-parter debates are, not going to work. And you just keep spamming it over and over and over again. You didn't even spell it correctly. Here's the 3-minute ad break here, though. The unjustifiable violence of the 3-minute ad break is upon you. You can subscribe if you no longer want to be hit with that ad break at the top of the hour, though. Here's the
war in Iraq. Real quote, "Let loose the dogs of war. I'm confident we will win." Oof. So Bush's time in office mostly provided a lot of uncomfortable sound bites for Democrats who were too paralyzed to do much of anything. Not saying this was Reagan's fault. Like, Reagan didn't cause 9/11, did he? I mean, he was still alive for it, but no. He couldn't have caused it. Right? Probably not. Right? Probably not. Let's move on to Obama, because for the first time in a long while, America was in the perfect place to desire change. And hey, Obama literally ran on change. It was likely the first time that left-leaning and specifically young voters got to be excited about a candidate. But like what Reagan taught us, just because the face of the party changed doesn't mean the goals changed, even when the goddamn motto was change. Obama continued to be advised by third-way Democrats, which resulted in the deprioritization of income inequality, initially a significant focus of his second term. The idea was to steer him away from excessive populism or anything that gives too much money to people who really need it. Even in his first term, Obama championed cuts to safety net programs like Social Security as a shared sacrifice to balance the budget. Side note, it's extremely funny for any president to talk about making a shared sacrifice when presidents make a taxpayer-funded $200,000 pension every year after they leave office.
Dude, to the one chatter who keeps saying, what do we do about the people of Golan Heights in a one-state solution? Dog, if you think 750,000 Jewish Israelis living in the West Bank is akin to 30 settlements comprising of 25,000 Jewish Israelis being moved out, I don't know what to tell you. They did this in Gaza, okay? The number was 8,000. They can do it in Golan Heights where the number is 25,000, okay? Like, I don't know if you're being intentionally obtuse or if you're trying to draw an analysis here and like compare it to Crimea's population, but it's not going to work because the Golan Heights are the Golan Heights is a relatively new in comparison to the rest of Israel, a relatively new territory. Okay? They can have the option of becoming Syrian citizens if they want to. I know that you don't care about any of these things because it seems like you're just simply trying to draw a comparison. It's simply for trying to like create a hypocrisy narrative here as a long-term community sub. This is part of the reason why I also like despise having this conversation because I know for a fact that I'm literally Syrian. Okay, you're Syrian. I don't know if you're like genuinely asking me about this, but you know, the people can then get Syrian citizenship and if they have Israeli citizenship and want to move into Israel, they can do that as well. Well, not Israel, but whatever this one state would be. The difference in this process is we're not having this conversation as the Russification of like Crimea is occurring. We're having this conversation many decades past that point, okay, where neither the USSR doesn't even exist at this point. Why do you care what happens to the settlers? They're illegal? Great question. I think I already described this, but ultimately I do care. Like, I don't just simply view the law as the law. And I do also think about like the morality behind it. And yes, I think that the morality of 750,000 people being forcibly relocated would look like mass violence. 25,000, on the other hand, could, especially because they haven't been living there for that long, you know, they could move. That's a little bit easier. There's still going to be violence there, but ultimately a little bit of violence in comparison to a lot of violence. Okay? That's the way I see it.
Until they finally die. Obama wasn't talking about making cuts to that particular Social Security plan. Interesting. And just in case it wasn't clear enough that Obama was a third-way sleeper agent, he hired William Daley to be his chief of staff in 2011. Daley is a third-way Dem who had been appointed to the board of Fannie Mae by Bill Clinton in 1993 and had served as an executive at J.P. Morgan Chase. And to be fair, he kinda had to court the right. During his entire administration, Obama and the Democrats had complete filibuster-proof control over the House and Senate for a total of 4 months. His entire presidency was obstructed by the GOP, or more specifically, this thing.
Former President Obama left so many vacancies and didn't try to fill those positions.
I'll tell you why. I was in charge of the of what we did the last 2 years of the Obama administration.
I will give you full credit for that.
Yeah, thanks, Palpatine.
Is Joe Manchin considered a third way, or am I misunderstanding? Yeah, you could say that. They're just Democratic Party insiders who played the role of spoilers for. Do you believe that the violence itself is abhorrent, or that it wouldn't work in favor of Palestinians? No, I believe that the violence itself is abhorrent. Anyway, let's continue.
So basically, since the 70s, Democrats miscalculated a pivot away from the New Deal and courted exactly no one.
I don't think that they miscalculated a pivot away from the New Deal. I think that they specifically did this because, they had corporate backing to do such a thing, and made America permanently a single party, like a uniparty process when it came to issues that actually correspond to people's material conditions, people's lives.
They were then conquered by Reagan and learned the complete wrong lesson from it, deciding instead to double down on their slow push to the right. And by the time an actual progressive-leaning and charismatic Democrat got in charge, they were furiously obstructed by the GOP, who were just so mad at Obama the entire time for some dark-skinned reason. And of course, we all know what happened once Trump won the White House in 2016. The failures of the third way agenda became very apparent, as it gave pissy platform stockings all the ammunition he needed to further erode social programs and industry regulation under the guise of standing up for American labor. His message of economic populism appealed to millions of mostly white voters on the campaign trail who felt ignored by corporate-friendly Democrats, even though those Democrats were mostly continuing Reagan-era policies in an effort to appeal to those very same voters. Because that's what happens when you push your party more to the center-right. It allows the actual right-wing party to move even more to the right, to the point that they attack Reagan-era policies for being too lefty or communist or whatever. Trump can try to dismantle the EPA without a shred of acknowledgement that it was founded by Nixon, and the Democrats allowed that to happen through decades of compromises with the so-called center until their party became unrecognizable. They gave a mouse a cookie, and now the mouse is trying to repeal the rights of women and minorities. It's a real shitty mouse. And so now that we're talking about Trump, it's time to discuss the other side of this story. Let's stylishly back up like we're in a Guy Ritchie film.
Anyway, the rest of it I don't really care about. Like, Reagan destroyed the GOP. Fuck them. GOP learned the right lessons, and for them and other racists and the right-wing think tanks and whatnot. This is a great video. I highly suggest you guys watch it. We have lost loyal to the anti-woke mind virus. Thanks to whoever curated this. Sick of these woke agendas ruining my streams. Can't wait to go live and know which games are safe. Don't worry, we have Cerberus XT right here. Cerberus XT, HasanAbi head French miniature painter, looked at this woke content detector list, which I'm going to be talking about in a second. Hold on.